Recently, I posted a short film about the nature illustrator Rosalie Hazlett, which you can watch on my channel. And that film, along with a collection of behind-the-scenes videos, was sponsored by one of my favorite camera brands, Viltrox. Now, Viltrox is known for making really nice but affordable lenses. And on that short film, I used the Viltrox Rays, which is a 6-lens series made specifically for the Ronin 4D. And those lenses performed really well on that film in particular, and if you're using the Ronin 4D, I highly recommend you check out the Viltrox Rays. But today we have a different Viltrox product to check out that they sent along to use on the film and in some of the behind the scenes, and that is a brand new 7-inch monitor, the DC-A1. Now, Viltrox is primarily known as a lens manufacturer, but they do make a lot of really nice accessories, and monitors is one of their newest avenues to explore, and last year I got their 6-inch monitor, the DC-X3, and I actually really like this monitor. The lens hood design is really nice, and it also has both HDMI and SDI ports. And so when I was testing out the Canon C80, it was really nice to have those SDI ports because that camera now has an SDI port as well. But today we have an even more exciting monitor, which is the DC-A1, the 7-inch monitor from Viltrox. So it comes in this really nice semi-hard case. So if you do travel a lot, then it's nice to have something like this to keep your monitor safe. And the nice thing about Viltrox when they sell a monitor is they don't just give you the monitor, they give you everything you need to get going. So right away, you already have a nice sun hood on there, and just like the 6-inch monitor, it has this really nice pop-up design. And the sun hood is great because it blocks the sun on really sunny days, but it also may not be necessary for this monitor, and I'll explain why later. But nice to have, and it also has one of my favorite snap-on designs, so it's not super easy to take off, which is actually nice, but it basically just snaps on the side without the cage. So if it's not on and you want to get the sun hood on really quickly, you don't need to put it on a cage or connect anything. It just slides on real simply, snaps on, and voila, you're good to go. So the case also comes with a monitor mount. So if you need to mount your monitor on top of the camera or on a cold shoe, it's already in the box, and a small NPF battery to power your monitor. And while we're on the subject, the monitor takes a single Sony NPF, slides right in, and you can power your camera that way. This doesn't have a ton of power, this battery, so I often will opt for something a little larger, like the small rig, which has a 78 watt, or even something from Core, which is closer to 48 watts, somewhere in there, 47 watts. So this will keep your monitor lasting a little bit longer. And the nice thing about the powering options for the DC-A1 is you can use a Sony NPF battery, but it can also be powered via USB-C. And that was actually one of the main reasons that I bought the 6-inch monitor originally, because I have some Canon batteries from Swit that have a USB-C out, and so I can power the monitor and the camera with the same battery, and that's really useful for keeping your rig small. But if you're using something like a Lumix S1R2 or any mirrorless camera and you're running a V-mount, a lot of new V-mounts can also power accessories via USB-C. So instead of having a D-tap cable that runs to a dummy Sony NPF, just a little clunkier, a little bigger, you can just power the monitor via USB-C. So that's awesome to see. You can also power it with a DC in. So if you want to plug it into the wall or any cable that runs from like a V-mount to a DC in, you could do that as well. But I primarily use the Sony NPF, but if I'm using a larger rig, then I'll use the USB-C. All right, so let's fire this guy up and I'll show you the different physical controls on the body and also the exposure tools that are inside this 7-inch monitor. So simple on and off switch here. Kick that on. And then I have a wireless transmitter sitting here, so let's go ahead and plug that in. So there is very little differentiation between the colors of the back of the C70 screen and this 7-inch monitor, which is great to see right out of the box because a lot of the cheaper monitors out there don't tend to be all that color accurate. All right, so the first main control on the body is this large control wheel here, and that control wheel does a few different things. The first is that when you press it, it goes into your menu system, and so you can see all your different exposure tools and all your different display settings right there. And then you can use that same control wheel to spin through the different menu settings. Now, that doesn't mean you can't change any of these settings with your fingers, because you can, because this is also a touchscreen monitor. But I'm actually a person who really likes physical controls. You know, if you've ever shot in bright sunlight, if you use your fingers a lot, you're gonna get streaks on your monitors, and suddenly you have to wipe it off, or you're getting a pretty bad glare just because of the oil that's on your fingers. And so then at the top of the monitor, you have different assignable buttons. You have just a back button, so when you're going through the menus, but you also have F1, F2, F3, and F4. And so you can set these to whatever you'd like. So clicking on F1, I have my waveform, and then F2 is false color. And then you have your LUT, which I'm already doing a view LUT coming from the C70, and so that just makes it a little too contrasty. But if you didn't want to send the viewing LUT from your camera, you could do it right here by clicking on the LUT button. Up here you have a USB-A port to update firmware. Again, the Sony MPF battery on the bottom. And then on the bottom, you have an HDMI in and an HDMI out. So if you did want to loop this out to a transmitter or some other monitor, you could do that. And then a headphone jack to monitor your audio. And then, as I mentioned, the USB-C, which you can use to power the monitor, and the DC-in, which is also another powering option. One of my biggest gripes with a lot of monitors out there is mounting points. Now, pretty much every monitor will have a bottom mounting point here on the bottom of the monitor, which is fine if you're mounting on top of a camera or on top of a handle. But as someone who often likes to offset their monitor in the same way you would on an FX6 or a C300, I really like to mount my monitors from the side, and it's really nice to see that the DC-A1 has a mounting point on the right side, which is a really big deal for me. It also has locking pin receivers, and they're not going to get any twist on that monitor mount. So that's the physical design of the monitor. Lots of really nice features. The only con I see here is that there's no SDI in and out, which is strange to see because the 6-inch monitor they released last year actually has both SDI in and out. But with a monitor this bright, which I'll get to soon, and also being a nice 7-inch monitor, not having an SDI in and out is not necessarily a surprise, but still it would have been nice to see. Now, Viltrox also sends this monitor mount, which is a pretty standard monitor mount, but it does have one locking pin on it, which is nice to see. A lot of the cheaper monitor mounts don't have that at all. And this one comes for free with the monitor, so it's nice to see that's on there. And you can just screw that right on the bottom of the monitor like so. And then you're good to go to mount that on your camera. When I'm looking at monitors, there are a few things that are most important. For me, it's brightness, size and weight, and being able to power it in a few different ways. And that's where this monitor really shines. So first of all, the size and weight is pretty exceptional for a 7-inch monitor. It's only 348 grams, which is close to the weight of a lot of 5-inch or 5.5-inch monitors. So the fact that you're getting a 7-inch monitor at only 348 grams is pretty great. With that being said, it doesn't feel all that cheap. It's definitely made out of plastic, but it's sort of a nice, robust plastic. I wouldn't drop it on pavement from 10 feet away, but it should be fine in normal day-to-day use. Probably the most important thing when using a monitor is being able to see it, and that means brightness. And this thing packs 2,800 nits into its 7-inch interface, which is pretty incredible, not only for any monitor, but a monitor at this price. Now, I've always sort of thought in my mind the benchmark is about 1,500 nits to actually see in daylight, and that's what the Ronin 4D monitor is. But there are some moments where that doesn't quite cut it as well. So getting to above 2,000 nits is huge. Getting to 2,800 nits basically means you can shoot in the desert and still be able to see this monitor. Because of the brightness and sharpness of the image, the monitor also has a really exceptional viewing angle. Viltrox claims 170 degrees, you can still see your monitor really nicely, and it's true. I can turn this almost 180 degrees and still see myself, and I'd probably be able to pull focus off of this. Why you'd ever look at your screen like that, I'm not sure, but it's nice to know that if you are ever off axis, you'll still be able to see your screen and create a nice image. Also, there's an automatic flip feature where you just turn it over and the monitor can recognize that you flipped it over and will orient the screen correctly. One of the main reasons to use a monitor is to use all of the exposure tools that these monitors pack into them. So you got the brightness, you got the mounting points, you got all of the ruggability that you need. So let's go into the menus and check out the different exposure tools. So you have your histogram, always nice to have. Vector scope. Again, you can tell kind of where your colors are, make sure you're color accurate. Your RGB parade, your full waveform, which in my opinion is one of the more useful tools. You can really judge your exposure across your entire frame with the waveform, and depending on where light is hitting, you'll see the waveform change. Your 3D LUTs, and you can load your own LUTs, which I think is pretty standard in most monitors these days, but nice to see it here. And then here are all your different peaking options. So if you wanted to do red peaking, you can do that, but you can also change it through different colors of green, blue, red. You also have false color, which a lot of cinema cameras actually don't have, especially from Sony, looking at you, Sony. But it's nice to know that it's on this monitor as well, so you can judge your exposure based on false color. Zebra pattern to make sure nothing is blown out. And Luckily for us, we have nothing above 85% zebra, which means we can get all of this detail back, especially with the C70's amazing dynamic range. And now anamorphic shooting is becoming a lot more affordable, so it's nice to see that you have pretty much every different D-squeeze option that you would need inside this monitor. So you got 1.3, 1.33, 1.5, 1.6, 1.8, and 2x. If you're looking for a very bright and light and portable 7-inch monitor, then I would highly recommend the DC-A1. In general, having a large monitor on your camera is great. You can really see your exposure, see what you're shooting. It almost feels like you're watching your film as you're creating it, where you just don't get that same feeling from a 5-inch monitor or the dinky little screens on the back of your cameras. And specifically, the DC-A1 from Viltrox has a lot going for it, especially at a price point this low. If you look at comparable monitors from something like a Small HD or Optimus, you're definitely spending in the thousands of dollars. Now, granted, you're not getting an SDI port from this monitor, which is a bit of a bummer, but you could always go to the 6-inch monitor from Viltrox and snag the SDI port as well. But for $278, it's a pretty incredible deal for more budget-minded shooters. Thanks again to Viltrox for sponsoring my short film on the nature illustrator Rosalie Hazlett, and for sending me the DC-A1 and the Viltrox Raise lens set to try out. But let me know if you're interested in the Viltrox DC-A1 and what you really like out of a 7-inch monitor for your own camera rig. And we'll see you in the next video.
Every time I go outside, even if it's just a little walk through local woods, I'm looking for something interesting that could potentially be incorporated into an art piece.